Basically, like who can afford to go to graduate school and how the people that have made it to graduate school, how can we support them during? There's a lot of focus on the DI efforts within recruiting. I also think that if there is not a support system for the students that are coming in and staying, I think that is a disservice to the minorities that you recruited. While it's really great to get a fellowship, if the school can get to brag about the funding that you have, the schools should also support you through the issues that might arise due to that funding.
Welcome to the Personal Finance for PhDs podcast, a higher education in personal finance. This podcast is for PhDs and PhDs to be who want to explore the hidden curriculum of finances to learn the best practices from money management, career advancement, and advocacy for yourself and others. I'm your host, Dr. Emily Roberts, a financial educator specializing in early career PhDs and founder of Personal Finance for PhDs. This is Season 18, Episode 3, and today my guest is Dr. Carolina Mendoza Cavazos, who holds a PhD in microbiology from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and currently works in industry. Carolina has long been interested in and open about personal finances, and she focused her DEI efforts while in graduate school around finances, including starting a money club and creating clear communications regarding pay and benefits. Carolina shares her insights into the kinds of financial issues graduate students face and how universities should back up their recruitment of diverse candidates with sufficient financial support and communication. Finally, Carolina and I discuss the financial goals and lifestyle upgrades she has enjoyed since starting her job in industry. When I teach budgeting, I emphasize that it actually consists of two components: budgeting, aka telling your money what to do, and tracking, aka checking that your money did what you told it to do. While I love and use automated tracking software, in my opinion, nothing beats manual tracking, which naturally keeps you accountable to yourself for your spending. In fact, last year, I made a custom expense tracking spreadsheet for my own use. If you would like to try out manual expense tracking, feel free to take my spreadsheet and use it as is or build it out however you like. I built in a couple of budgeting principles that I like to follow and teach to PhDs. There's a companion video available explaining those principles. If you'd like to grab the spreadsheet, it's totally free. Simply sign up through pfforphds.com/tracker. You can find the show notes for this episode at pfforphds.com/S18E3. Without further ado, here's my interview with Dr. Carolina Mendoza Cavazos of Finances with Carolina. I am delighted to have joining me on the podcast today Dr. Carolina Mendoza Cavazos. She is a scientist working in the private sector. She finished her PhD about 2 years ago. And like me, Carolina is also really into personal finance. And also, she has a special focus on DEI efforts related to personal finance. And Carolina has a website called financeswithcarolina.com. And I first came across her, it must have been several years ago, on Twitter. And I've been keeping my eye on her for a while. And we finally had reason to connect recently and set up this podcast interview, which I'm really excited about. So, Carolina, would you please go ahead and introduce yourself further for the audience?
Sure thing, Emily. Hi, everyone. My name is Carolina, and I obtained my PhD at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I am currently a scientist in the R&D department at Promega, and I'm very excited to be here today.
Yeah, let's go back even further because I want to hear about your background, especially with respect to finances. Starting kind of in your childhood, you can give us a brief overview of how things were financially growing up, and then through college and graduate school. And I'm interested both in kind of materially what was going on, and also how that affected your mindset through that period.
My family and I moved to the United States in 2011, and I finished my senior year of high school, then applied to college, and I obtained my undergrad at California State University, Fullerton. My dad is an accountant, so he talked about money quite often. I would say that being an immigrant, we did have certain like mindset that came with that, and frugality was a really important one. I would say that from the both sides of my family, either one or two generations broke the cycle of poverty. And I grew up in a family with two college educated parents. And we were able to migrate here to the United States due to a job opportunity for my mom. So that was kind of how we got here. I would say I was always interested in finances. In general, in college, the first time I got a paycheck was through a program called MARC, Maximizing Access to Career Research, and is a pipeline for like graduate school programs. So that's kind of where my budgeting journey started. I lived at home during college, and receiving that paycheck was the first time that I was, making all my budgeting spreadsheets and stuff like that.
Yeah, so let's kind of turn to graduate school now. It actually seems like you were set up pretty well to understand maybe the finance of graduate school, having been in that program, the MARC program during undergrad. So tell us about like that transition and maybe the kinds of offers you got and whether you considered, finances. It sounds like you probably would in your selection of which university to attend.
I don't think I looked at the stipend as carefully as I would today. I gravitated towards the Midwest because the Midwest had awesome microbiology, and I knew I was going to end up somewhere in the Midwest. My last two top school choices like were between UW-Madison, where I ended up attending, and WashU. So those were my two offers, and in general, stipend wise, they were pretty similar. However, UW-Madison had a program similar to Mark called SciMed. Shout out to SciMed. It's called Science and Medicine Scholars. And basically, it was a community that I could plug into that I did not see at any other universities. And I felt that that was uh, a good fit for me. So that's kind of why I decided to go to UW-Madison.
So tell us a little bit more about how finances were going for you during graduate school. You said that you had, a frugal and a debt averse kind of background with your family. You're in the Midwest. Yeah. Was the stipend livable? Were you able to save? How are things going for you personally?
Yeah, in terms of finances, I did move here to Madison with a partner at the time, now my husband. And that's kind of when we started not fully merging our finances, but we're definitely operating as a household at the moment. And basically, we were like kind of equally splitting everything. So that was definitely helpful. And I would say that the stipend was livable. However, having a partner was definitely helpful. And one interesting thing is that I was funded the whole time during graduate school. So the 5 years I had different grants, fellowships, things like that. So I was fortunate that I didn't have to pay segregated fees or like the student fees for that. I ended up working as an hourly for SciMed, and that was a workaround in order to get retirement benefits, like a 403B or something like that. I definitely think that my husband and I had like different mindsets about finances, and it was interesting to kind of get into that. But I would say in graduate school, I found your podcast through Hello PhD, and I think the thing that really caught my attention was the use of buckets for like high yield savings accounts. So I think that that was like one of the first things that I did in order to get the same service, but like in a cheaper way. Like for example, like car insurance. I faced a lot of issues with funding transitions that ended up being, in my opinion, DI issues in terms that I don't know. I saw a lot of the times like the same people in the program doing the same jobs and being funded differently would still face different issues. And in terms for advanced opportunity fellowships, like for um, minorities like me and things like that, I would say like that was like a double whammy of you might have a surprise tax bill and things like that, and like how do you deal with that? Do you have your emergency fund set up? Do you rely on a network? Is there a network that you can rely? Do you incur debt and things like that? Issues that I encounter with my funding, I always wonder and through the grapevine have heard that other people that were funded had these issues. So I think that that was my first step to get into using personal finance and DI efforts during graduate school.
Mm. Yeah, I definitely want to hear about more about that in a minute. Can you expand at all on the issues you were just talking about with like the funding? So like quarterly estimated tax bills, we talk about that a lot on the podcast. Hopefully the listener is familiar with that. Anything else? Like just tell me what the issues were that you either experienced or that you observed.
Yes. So one of the issues right off the bat was taxes, obviously. And I definitely had a tax bill that I wasn't expecting, and I wasn't aware of the fellowship. Um, Quarterly estimated taxes on my first year or something like that, the kitty tax, why not? One of the things that I would say is that access to benefits was a little different. So, for example, there was no someone in my lab and me, the other person could contribute to an FSA account, or they would be able to and eligible to open a 403b. Um, what else? Gaps in insurance or what are they called? Potential gaps in insurance. For example, some of my friends that were in the NSF were getting COBRA letters when they were having their funding transitions because you might have lost insurance and they were not aware of this. And it was just because some paperwork was delayed and things like that. Personally, I did an internship during my fourth year summer between fourth and fifth. And I had to take a short leave of absence for that. I had to prepay my insurance, and there was a lot of issues with that. I think I was the first one to do this in the program that was receiving a stipend that was receiving a stipend and had to pause that in order to go into the private sector and get private sector money. Usually, if you were in your, I don't know, a W-2 route, I don't know how they would have handled it, but there was miscommunication on that. At one point, I wasn't sure if I was going to have insurance over the summer, and access to healthcare is definitely something that everybody should have. And I had some health issues during graduate school, so that was a very scary time for me. And through the grapevine again, when that happened, I started documenting if other people have faced this within the fellowships, within the T32s and stuff like that. So when I was working as an hourly for Simon, some of my job was to write down what should you do if you are going to go into a internship. What are the I also implemented, I was part of the DEI committee in my program, and I also proposed and implemented a funding transition form to pinpoint where is your money coming from in this semester, where is your money going to come from next time, these people know each other, should we introduce everybody, do they know that you're coming or that you're leaving the fellowship, training grant, etc. And I found a lot of people that were having trouble with these things, and it wasn't just me. So I think that there is a very powerful thing in community, and I was trying to find the people that were having these issues and try to place safety nets for when people did face them, because they're bound to happen sometimes. They knew what to do, who to contact, and things like that.
So helpful. I mean, it's amazing that you worked along with your peers to put that resource together. Through Simon, it sounds like it was kind of part of your job, but to the extent that you were
Yes.
doing it and it wasn't part of your job, amazing community service, but probably should have been taken up by the university. Obviously, they're the ones providing these benefits or facilitating the benefits. So, like, yeah, they should be taking charge and making sure the transitions are seamless. I think about this sometimes with respect to the tax questions of, calculating and filing quarterly estimated tax or dealing with stuff during tax season. Like I know it's really normal in the US for your employer to be very hands off about taxes. Like, yeah, we'll do the withholding. That's it. That's the extent of what we'll handle. But like universities aren't even doing that much in most cases for fellowship recipients. And I do think they should be a little bit more proactive. And thank you so much to the ones that work with me and are proactive about this. But be proactive about at least communicating, right, with the students about what's going to happen. And it sounds like not only in the tax realm, but it extends with all these other benefits like you were just talking about. So I'm really glad you kind of gave us that overview. So it sounds like you were working with, SciMed and also talking with your peers. Can you tell me a little bit more about kind of what you learned or observed about how your peers were handling this stuff financially, not just with respect to the benefits issues that we just spoke about, but maybe more generally what they needed to know or what they needed to apply in their personal finances during graduate school?
Yeah, I think a lot of my peers were either, I don't know, like I would say like there was like two categories. People that were in the category of like, you know what, I don't want to think about it. I'm gonna take a pause on this while I'm in graduate school. And once I figure out what my career path is gonna be, I'm gonna pick it up. And there was a small subset, small but mighty, that was interested on talking about this and was sort of like, I think the taxes are the foot in the door for everybody, that they're just want to learn a little bit more of how to handle those. But once they're in and then you just start chatting and like, where do you put your tax money before the thing is due? How are you self withholding and things like that? I think that was kind of like the natural birth of the money club that we developed. And I really can't remember if that was part of the assignment job or eventually we kind of intertwine it or something like that. The assignment job was basically really help your community. How can you do this? Obviously, there was like events and food ordering or flyer making and stuff like that. But at one point, I was trying to explore student services as a career. So I think that that was my in with that position. And then it turned into a way for me to look at this DI issues and try to create resources for the people that were within the fellowship, we're in the fellowship, we're going to come into the fellowship, and things like that.
I totally agree with you that the taxes are the way to getting most people's attention into personal
Yeah.
finances. Where did it go after that? You already mentioned using targeted savings or sinking funds as a helpful sort of addendum to your budgeting. Did you all talk about that, or what other topics ended up being of interest to this group?
One of the topics, definitely people were interested in investing. I think that that was one of the other ones that were kind of popular and I don't know, mystified a little bit, and people wanted to ask around. I think the Money Club really started getting around going like in 2021 after the summer of 2020 when George Floyd was murdered. The entire a group in the program started writing a letter to our admins and our professors and things like that, in which we were quote unquote demanding changes in our program and whatever. So I was involved in that effort, and I do remember putting some personal finance stuff in there. And I think when the whole program read it and they knew that there was like some of the things that I was requesting, like for example, I had recommended you to our program. I don't know if they ended up hiring you or not. Basically, like in the program, then I became known as the person that talked about money, and then people that wanted to talk about money found me. And um, the other topics that I would say not so much as investing, but I kind of wrapped it around with investing was retirement and some of the benefits that the university was offering for students that did have access to those. The majority of my program was not like broad partners or anything like that. I don't remember, but sometimes there was students that had in their budget a way to invest and they just wanted to start.
Absolutely. For me, I always say taxes and investing are my two favorite topics to discuss. And it's lucky because those are the two top, most popular topics that get requested, which is really fun for me. It's so interesting too, being in an environment where some people have access to that 403B, and even the other, well, you mentioned an FSA, not an HSA, through the university, but perhaps other benefits that be relevant, for investing. And obviously,
Yeah.
if you're on fellowship, and if you're not an employee, you're not going to have access to that. But it sounds like a subset of people would, and you
Mhm.
and you also had
So
access
I
to your
found a
job
loophole.
assignment. Yeah, to be
Yeah.
a proper W-2 employee, at least for a few hours, enough to give you that benefit.
And I made it automatic that all 100% of my hours with SIMED would go to the 403B.
Well, that's kind of cool that they let you do that. I know sometimes employers that have like a restriction, like no more than 50% of your paycheck or 25 or something. But obviously, since it was just part-time for you, that makes sense. Yeah. Anything else you want to tell us about the Money Club?
I think people just need safe spaces to talk about money. And I think it's one of the cases that if you create it, people will come. I I personally feel that a lot of people wanted to start working on their finances and they just didn't have the language, the space, sometimes the resources or like the closed mindset of, well, I'm not making enough money, so I how can I work on this? And I think that's my main one of the things that I try to help people with is that your personal finance, like in starting to working on your personal finance, it doesn't have to be this ginormous thing that you have to put thousands of dollars into it. I think it's small actions that just kind of add up. And my whole spiel is that I would like to create systems that you later edit when you get a different job. And there's a lot of things that you can do in order to work in your personal finance that don't cost money or they can be a $2 thing and is more of like flexing that muscle as a lot of people say in the community. I think it's true.
I totally agree. And going back to kind of what you said earlier about, that you sort of encounter two kinds of people, like some people who wanted to engage, but some people who just want to say, I'm not making that much money. It's not the right time to be working on my finances. I will pick this up later. And they are overlooking that benefit of, as you said, flexing the muscle, of learning a few skills, of getting a little bit of extra knowledge, whether that can be applied during grad school or whether it's just going to be something that's practiced a bit or set aside for later. All of that does help you set up for financial success in your next post PhD career when you have that higher salary coming in. And of course, it will be easier in some sense when you're making more money, but if you've never practiced budgeting, if you've never really thought about what's important to you in your spending, if you've never opened an IRA before, well, that's stuff you're going to have to learn when the stakes are a little bit higher later on. So, of course, you know that I'm a proponent of working on that stuff during graduate school, if at all possible. And as you said, you don't have to be able to save necessarily to have a savings rate to do positive things in your personal finance. There's lots of cost neutral things that you could do. And hopefully you can get to a point where you're able to save.
Emily here for a brief interlude. Would you like to learn directly from me on a personal finance topic such as taxes, goal setting, investing, frugality, increasing income, or student loans, each tailored specifically for graduate students and postdocs? I offer seminars and workshops on these topics and more in a variety of formats, and I'm now booking for the 2024-2025 academic year. If you would like to bring my content to your institution, would you please recommend me as a speaker or facilitator to your university, graduate school, graduate student association, or postdoc office? My seminars are usually slated as professional development or personal wellness. Orientations, or very close to the start of the academic year, would be a perfect time for tax education or general personal finance content. Ask the potential host to go to pfforphds.com/financial-education or simply email me at emily@pfforphds.com to start the process. I really appreciate these recommendations, which are the best way for me to start a conversation with a potential host. The paid work I do with universities and institutions enables me to keep producing this podcast and all my other free resources. Thank you in advance if you decide to issue a recommendation. Now back to our interview.
I want to get back to this point about how you use the topic of personal finance within your own DEI efforts. And it's something you've mentioned a few different aspects of it until now, but I just wanted you to just make it really explicit. Like, how do you view this and how do you work in this area?
So I think DI efforts are sometimes in some spaces, and this is not particularly about my university or my program or anything like that, but they can get a little bit performative and they can get into check a box. We have a DI committee and that's it. That's it. So I was involved in the DI committee since its founding at my program after the letter that I mentioned that we wrote. So through that, there was two representatives for the students in this committee, and we will bring issues forward regarding whatever our peers had brought up. And a lot of those ones sometimes were personal finance related. For example, there was one time that our paycheck schedule changed from a monthly to a biweekly time. And a lot of the students were like, how am I going to make rent if the biweekly paycheck is happening and then that I'm receiving that in this amount of time? I don't have a safety net to just make that payment at the beginning of the month if this happens. So trying to make explicit what type of resources are available in the university for emergency hardship and stuff like that. That was one thing. I definitely always advocated for more clarity on funding transitions as well as the fellowship letter, for example. I know that that one for my specific university came in March while your W-2 came in January. So we had a case in which a student basically submitted their tax return after they got a W-2 and they got the fellowship letter and they had to amend it. So basically being more transparent and proactive about the types of issues that funded students might face. Having I know one of the other representatives really advocated for having the number of the stipend for our incoming students instead of just kind of being this nebulous number that you kind of hear there when you're already in the interview. During the time that I was there, another person, not myself, but they got my full support, was really trying to start the conversation of a livable wage. So, what is that like? How do we compare to other programs? And she did a tremendous effort in order to look at the cost of living and how is that going and how, it might not be, our stipend might not be keeping up with this. What are we going to do about that? So I would say that I definitely advocated for transparency in my DI position from the program for the university. And I basically started spreading the information and just kind of reporting back to the committee and say like this is what I did, and I had my PI's full support. I was very fortunate that she had my back, and there was instances in which I think if my PI was not supportive, like maybe they could have been like some issues, and in terms of just like, hey, I think that what we're doing is wrong. Not wrong, but like not having the stipend number really there.
Yeah, sort of obfuscating. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't like that as much. My main issue was the medical coverage, and I did as much as I could in order to create as much documentation and as much process safety nets for people to not receive that letter of the Cobra Fellowship, not have to pay out of pocket for necessary prescriptions, If you have a lacking coverage, you cannot even make a doctor's appointment. It's not like you can make it for later when you have coverage. They're just not going to talk to you. I had a back injury during graduate school and um, other chronic conditions that access to healthcare was is necessary for everyone, but for me was particularly scary not to, and just the threat of not having it is sometimes it was just that some deadline was occurring and that you'd really never had a lack of care, but just having that big thing in your brain that you might not have it, I think that takes you away from science and then you're worrying about that instead of your experiment.
It's exactly what I was thinking when you were going through that response is that if we want to keep graduate students and postdocs focused on their research, focused on progressing in their programs, successful in their academics, academia has to materially support them properly so they aren't one distracted by the things like the benefit issues and all the one things that we've talked about so far, but then also by financial stress overall, having to be super super frugal or having to make very extreme sacrifices in what your expenses are, or on the flip side, maybe spending a lot of time side hustling because your stipend is just not sufficient. And as a DEI issue, I mean, if we want more diversity in academia, and more people being successful across the board, we have to support them in a way that we're assuming that they're not going to have to depend on family members or partners or other people who might or might not be able to contribute financially to them. Um, and frankly, a lot of people, now have caregiving responsibilities. They have to contribute to the finances of their families too. And so, again, you can't even assume it's just like a single person and all we have to do is provide for your basic living expenses. And that should be enough for you. Because even these small bumps in the road, like you've been talking about, these small emergencies or something medical comes up, or I have to take an unexpected flight, these irregular expenses that you mentioned earlier, that can completely throw off your budget if you're living with very little margin, very close to the edge in the first place. So, the way that I see it, we just have to fund graduate students um, more than the baseline, right? Like not even the living wage. We got to go beyond the living wage because you to really be financially secure, you have to have a savings rate because these emergencies, these things will come up. And it's so much easier to recover from them and get back to being focused on your program and on your work when you have the finances there and you don't have to scramble and be stressed about it. So that's my part of the soapbox there. Yeah, anything more that you'd like to say about your like the way that you do these DEI efforts?
What I currently try to do and what I tried to do during graduate school was really providing the information that some people might not have. Basically, like who can afford to go to graduate school and how the people that have made it to graduate school, how can we support them during? I believe that there's a lot of focus on the DI efforts within recruiting and being like, yes, come to our university and having admissions numbers. And I think that that is very important. I also think that if there is not a support system for the students that are coming in and staying, I think that is a disservice to the minorities that you recruited. So while it's really great to get a fellowship and it's really good to be a funded student and that opens the doors for you to go into a lab that you might not have access before or gives you more research freedom and things like that. I think that if the school can get to brag about the funding that you have, the schools should also support you through the issues that might arise due to that funding.
Very good point. Thank you so much for adding that. Let's turn our attention back to you in your post PhD life with your proper job, with your proper salary, which sounds amazing. So, how are you pursuing financial goals these days? And how are you doing with your spending and just like what's going on in your finances now?
Well, the private industry pays very well. And as we know, our equation for budgeting, income is one of the biggest in there. So I would say that for the first 6 months that I was at my full-time employment, I didn't give myself a raise and I threw everything into retirement. So I think I started it in the end of August. So I tried to get as close as the max as I could for the employee sponsor 401k. And that was really great because we were used to living in a given stipend and we didn't really change much during those 6 months. Then after that, I would say that my husband and I made a list of things that we wanted to upgrade in our house. And one of them was a new bed, one of them was a new fridge, and things that we were like, it's large expenses. And I don't know, it just felt like it was definitely a pivotal moment in income that we could just buy this and not really like budget for it or something like that. And I think we bought the fridge with like a bonus or something, my sign up bonus or something like that. And I would say right now, because in graduate school I faced some medical issues, I would say that I really became a quote unquote valuist, that I was really trying to find what adds value to my life and the things that I really care about. And I think when people get sick or something like that, they really turn inward and start thinking of like what is important in life. And I really started seeing like, okay, what in my budget reflects my values, what doesn't, and how can we reconcile those? So, for example, family is very important to me and my husband. So, I am happy that travel is a big category in my budget. And we ran the numbers for last year, and I think like that was like our third category that we spend money on because our families are not here, so we have to travel to see them. And we are pursuing fire. I think right now we don't have responsibilities that are really sinking funds at the moment. So I think we're just kind of understanding what this new income can do and where can we put it into the long-term retirement plans. And I'm also focusing on trying to live the life that I want. And I feel like during graduate school sometimes people really throw themselves into work and they're they're passionate about their stuff and they kind of like sometimes like don't have like outside things. I definitely was guilty of that. So I'm trying to course correct and really focus on things that bring me joy in my everyday today and spend on those ones. I won't say frivolously, but definitely spend on the things that bring me joy, and the things that I don't care about, like my cell phone plan, to definitely cut it as much as I can.
I just hope that the listeners who are still in graduate school and are looking forward to the transition that you have completed can remember this example when they're in your shoes, because in my view you have executed this like just perfectly, which is kind of a combination of live like a grad student, like, okay, don't make any major changes right away. It sounds like you didn't have to move or anything. So like there was some stability and it was easier in a sense to continue on with your previous level of spending. But in combination with that, sort of as a default, okay, we're going to default to not changing anything. But then, as you said, be so intentional about thinking through where you do want to spend more or where you want to save more, to reach your financial goals and your lifestyle goals and everything, and just add money to those buckets and to those places, and really get, as you said, like introspective about what's important to you and apply that to your budget and reconcile them as best you can. Um, I just think it's a wonderful, wonderful example, especially for someone who doesn't, right, immediately after graduate school, because the moving process brings in like more variables and more opportunities for like chaos in your budget when you have those kinds of transitions. That was the one that I went through personally. But yeah, I just think it's so wonderful and awesome job. Of course, given the background that we heard, we knew that you were going to do an awesome job with this, but it's just amazing to like hear some more details about that. Were there any skills or mindsets that you developed during graduate school with respect to your finances that you found useful in this post PhD life that you haven't already brought up?
I think making things automatic was something that I am still doing, and I'm glad that I started before. And I think like going all back to the beginning about the savings accounts, and we had a lot of transactions being automatic, and right now I feel like we're just kind of coasting. Like it's something that we have developed already, and I think that I'm never gonna pay my car insurance by month. I think that that is something that I started doing in grad school because it was cheaper, and now we just kind of continue with that. I think the frugal mindset of graduate students and like finding fun things to do for free. That is something that I have continued. Just yesterday, I went to the library because they had a craft cafe, and I made a craft, and I had a blast, and it cost $0. So I think a graduate student is good at finding those things around and taking the opportunity to, have fun with a free activity. When your stipend is not as large, you sometimes like you really try to find the things that you care about and spend money on those. Like for example, I have a friend that he was really into biking, and he bought a rather expensive bike, but it brought him a lot of joy, and that was something that he did during graduate school, and biking was his like stress reliever. So that was very worth it for him. And I think finding the things that are worthy for you, I think graduate school is a great time because you are sort of like tight on the money side, and then sort of like continue those things and cut mercilessly in the rest.
That's her meat Sadie. I know that quote.
Yeah.
Well, it's so great. It's so wonderful talking with you, Carolina. Can you tell the listeners more about finances with Carolina and what you do through your business?
Sure. This business started out of the Money Club, and I wanted to have a space in which I can help graduate students that are facing similar challenges to the ones that I faced or that my peers faced. And I would say that right now I do a lot of coaching calls in which students fill out a questionnaire that I have for them, and that covers things, uh, as I mentioned, what brings you joy in your life. And I'm not going to ask them to cut in their budget if that thing brings them joy. And we go all over debt repayment and um, trying to set up those high yield savings account. What are irregular expenses that they are going to face? Retirement, a lot of people are interested in that. And I would say personally for my community, I think finding someone that went through graduate school is just helpful, that they can relate to you. I think that that is something that you and I bring to our communities, that we know what it was like, and we know what the problems might have been, and heard about certain solutions or know someone that might have gone into that. So I would say the network that I developed during graduate school, I have been using that for my clients as well. If someone is and right now I would say coaching, like just one-on-ones, are my main focus. And the way that I try to get funded is basically making the program cover those so the grad student doesn't have to pay. Yeah, anything from budgeting to debt repayment. And I really like the one-on-one conversation. I don't think that's scalable, but I'm having a lot of fun with that. So, and I do like having an impact on someone's life directly. So I think that's why I'm keeping it on the one-on-ones at the moment. And I do have one digital product in which I have put like just kind of like stuff together in which what the most common questions are and things like that. And I understand that not everybody likes the chatty um, the chattiness that comes with like one-on-one coaching. So that's why I developed that one. In the future, I hope to develop one that is not focused on graduate students and just in general, because now I have been finding at work that some people that I did not find them in graduate school, and they're now starting their careers and they're like in their first full-time job with benefits and things like that. They're a little bit lost. So that is another digital product that I want to develop, but it's not ready yet. Yeah.
Sounds like you're repeating what you did during graduate school. You're just a person that is open about money, that people can feel comfortable talking to you, and you find other people who are interested and you find other people who need your help at every single stage. So that's just wonderful. And tell the listeners where they can find you.
Yes, listeners can find me at financeswithcarolina.com. And in there, there's a link to the digital product that I talked about. There's a link to the coaching services and things like that. So if you find me relatable and you want to chat about money, schedule something.
Beautiful. Okay, let's finish up with the last question that I ask of all my guests, which is what is your best financial advice for another early career PhD? And that could be something that we've already touched on in the interview, or it could be something completely new.
My best financial advice, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And I think that if you start flexing the muscle of working on your personal finances with small changes that are sustainable and realistic for you, you're more likely to stick to those goals. I would also say that in order to keep that momentum going and that inspiration that you sometimes need on personal finance, I really would like to encourage the listeners to find content creators that speak with speak to you in experiences that you relate to, in experiences that you might have o- aspirational things, and overall really find the content that is going to keep you motivated. And the content is the same, it's just the delivery is the the experiences that the people that are delivering the content, the network of those people. So overall, find someone that does inspire you and keep you motivated, and slow and steady.
All right. Name your top few content creators that you love to follow for yourself personally.
Yes. Well, of course, your podcast. I think that was one of the ones that Hello PhD, you did a cross interview with them, and that's how I find you. And I was just mesmerized of all the things that I could do with my stipend. um, so that's one definitely related to graduate school. In terms of minorities, I really like the podcast Brown Ambition.
Me
There's
too.
two ladies in there, and they have everything about career questions, entrepreneurship, money stuff, and how that relates to one another. They're in different stages of their careers and lives, and just very interesting to see where they're coming from and where they're going. Popcorn Finance is another one that is very nice, and it has a lot of investing. I love their investing series. I referred everyone to that one because they have a lot of content of like what is an ETF, what is an index fund, what is a lot of what is, and when you start reading all these things,
I didn't know about that series. I'm going to check that out.
it's really good. Um, Journey to Launch is another one, but I follow. She definitely has like really cool interviews and just a lot of inspirational stories. Afford Anything by Paula Pant. Yeah, those ones are the ones that like I probably listened like yesterday or today.
Yeah, every single one of those podcasts is also on my feed, except for Popcorn Finance. I've only listened on and off to Popcorn Finance, but the rest of them, I'm a regular listener. I love all of them. Especially Afford Anything is like taking the podcast medium to like the next level with like journalism around
Yes.
finances, which is so amazing. Paula Pant's doing an amazing job. Okay, well, Carolina, thank you so much for giving this interview. It's been really insightful and it's been lovely talking with you. Thank you so much for agreeing to come on.
Of course.
Listeners, thank you for joining me for this episode. I have a gift for you. You know that final question I ask of all my guests regarding their best financial advice? I have collected short summaries of all the answers ever given on the podcast into a document that is updated with each new episode release. You can gain access to it by registering for my mailing list at pfforphds.com/advice. Would you like to access transcripts or videos of each episode? I link the show notes for each episode from pfforphds.com/podcast. See you in the next episode, and remember, you don't have to have a PhD to succeed with personal finance, but it helps. Nothing you hear on this podcast should be taken as financial, tax, or legal advice for any individual. The music is Stages of Awakening by Poddington Bear from the Free Music Archive and is shared under CC by NC. Podcast editing by Dr. Lourdes Bobbio and show notes creation by Dr. Jill Hoffman.